Here at this site, we have the tomb of Moses.
There's a tomb here
Yeah,
of Moses.
yes.
Can we see it?
Yeah, it's down.
What if a discovery inside Moses' tomb shook the very foundation of faith? Is it even his exact and real place of final rest? Recently, archaeologists uncovered something so startling, it's sending shockwaves through religious communities worldwide. This isn't just a dusty relic or ancient artifact. It challenges long-held beliefs and sacred stories. The secret hidden for centuries now threatens to rewrite history as we know it, and as we the prophet himself. Get ready, because what they found inside Moses' tomb terrifies all religious people. Behold Moses' tomb. The name Moses carries immense weight across three of the world's major religions. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all revere him as a prophet, leader, and lawgiver. Yet, for all the respect and recognition given to his legacy, one mystery has lingered for millennia: the final resting place of Moses. According to the Hebrew Bible, Moses died in the land of Moab, and his burial site was deliberately hidden. But to this day, no one knows where his grave is. Deuteronomy 34:6. This has left generations of believers and scholars wondering, speculating, and sometimes even searching. But what if someone did find something? And what if that discovery didn't comfort the faithful, but instead unsettled them? Recently, rumors have circulated about a groundbreaking archaeological find in a remote region near Mount Nebo, long associated with the final days of Moses. A group of researchers, using new ground-penetrating radar and excavation technologies, reportedly uncovered an ancient tomb sealed in an unusual fashion. What startled them was not merely the possibility that it could be connected to Moses, but the contents within. According to early reports, the site held artifacts inconsistent with the accepted biblical narrative. Among them were ancient writings on stone tablets that bore symbols from cultures not traditionally linked with Moses or his time. Even more perplexing were depictions of a bearded figure not commanding authority, but seemingly performing rituals more closely tied to early Mesopotamian or even pagan traditions. The implications of such a discovery ripple far beyond academic circles. For religious adherents, Moses represents purity of purpose and divine mission. He is not just a historical figure, but a vessel of God's will. Any suggestion that complicates or humanizes him beyond Scripture, especially if it suggests syncretism with non-Abrahamic belief systems, threatens to destabilize the carefully held frameworks of faith. It is not fear of Moses being wrong that terrifies people, but the possibility that the narrative they have built their understanding of God upon is more complex, more human, and less divinely dictated than they believed. However, it is important to approach this topic with both caution and compassion. History is never as clean-cut as the stories we pass down, and archaeology often raises more questions than it answers. The fear many religious people may feel is not irrational. It is deeply tied to their identities, their values, and their connection to the sacred. If this tomb, whether or not it truly belongs to Moses, challenges the known story, it should not be seen as an attack on faith, but as an opportunity to explore deeper truths. Rather than being terrified, perhaps this is a moment for reflection. Faith, after all, is not meant to be static. It evolves with time, deepens with challenge, and matures with understanding. Discoveries that push us to think differently do not necessarily erase belief. They can enrich it. They invite us to question not just the past, but our response to it. What do we do when the sacred becomes more human? How do we hold on to the eternal when the historical shifts beneath our feet? Whether or not this tomb belongs to Moses may never be confirmed. Why it might be impossible to find. There are a few reasons why we probably won't ever find the true burial place of Moses. First, and most obvious, the Bible says we won't. Now, whether you take that literally or not depends on your view of Scripture. But the point remains, nobody has ever claimed to find it in thousands of years. That kind of silence is rare in the ancient world where relics were big business. Second, think about the context. If the Israelites had known where Moses was buried, it could have turned into a shrine or a pilgrimage site. That might sound nice, but from a biblical point of view, it would have been dangerous. Moses was a great leader, but he was still just a man, and worshipping his tomb could have turned into idol worship. It's possible that God deliberately kept the location secret to prevent this from happening. Third, even if someone back then had known the exact spot, there's the question of time. We're talking about over 3,000 years ago. The geography of the region has changed: earthquakes, landslides, erosion, even human development over centuries. Whatever marker might have existed would have been long gone. Other theories and legends. That hasn't stopped people from coming up with other ideas, though. Some Jewish traditions hold that Moses didn't really die in the normal sense, but was taken up by God like Elijah. That idea shows up in some of the old writings outside the Bible and adds to the mystery. If Moses didn't die in the usual way, then of course there's no grave. There are even more unusual theories out there. Some say the body of Moses was hidden on purpose by angels. Some think there's a reason his tomb hasn't been found because it's tied to future events. There's a reference in the book of Jude in the New Testament to a dispute between the archangel Michael and the devil over the body of Moses, which only adds to the mystery and spiritual tension around the whole thing. On the more earthly side of things, there have been a few archaeological claims over the years, but none have ever been proven. And honestly, there's not much to go on. No bones, no artifacts, nothing clearly linked to Moses himself. So, where is Moses buried? The honest answer is we don't know, and we probably never will. But maybe that's the point. Moses spent his whole life leading a people who often misunderstood him. He did not get to enter the promised land even after everything he did. His death was quiet, almost private. Just him and God on a lonely mountain. No huge funeral, no public mourning, no national holiday. It's kind of fitting when you think about it. Moses wasn't about drawing attention to himself. He had flaws, and he often argued with God, but he was always trying to serve something bigger than himself. Maybe it's best that his body isn't lying in a marble tomb or turned into a tourist site. Maybe his legacy is stronger because we remember what he did not, where he ended up. Some stories don't need an ending carved in stone. They live on, not in graves, but in the lives and memories of the people they touched. The man who parted the Red Sea. Moses is one of those figures in history and religion who just stands out, no matter how you look at it. When you think about greatness, Moses almost instantly comes to mind because of the huge impact he had on so many people, cultures, and faiths. He is not just a character in a story, but someone who changed the course of history and inspired countless generations. What makes Moses truly great is not just the miracles or the laws he brought down, but his perseverance, leadership, and deep connection with something bigger than himself. From the very beginning, Moses' life was filled with extraordinary moments. He was born into a time when his people, the Israelites, were enslaved and suffering terribly. The very fact that he survived as a baby because his mother trusted and believed in hope speaks volumes about the kind of person he was destined to be. Being raised in the palace of Pharaoh, Moses had a glimpse of power and luxury, but he never forgot his roots or his people's pain. This internal conflict shaped his character and prepared him for the difficult path ahead. It is amazing to think about how he could have chosen a life of comfort, but instead chose to stand with the oppressed. One of the most striking things about Moses is his incredible courage. He didn't run away from danger or difficult decisions. When he saw an Egyptian hurting an Israelite, Moses stepped in and acted even though it put him at risk. Later on, when he had to confront Pharaoh and demand freedom for his people, Moses stood firm despite all the odds against him. Imagine standing in front of the most powerful ruler in the world and insisting on something that seemed impossible. That takes bravery, but also faith and a strong sense of purpose. Moses' greatness also comes from his role as a lawgiver and spiritual leader. The story of him receiving the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai is one of the most iconic moments in religious history. Those commandments have influenced not just religious thought, but legal systems and moral values across the globe. It is incredible to think that one man could be the conduit for such important teachings that continue to guide millions today. Beyond the laws themselves, Moses' ability to communicate with God and lead his people through years of wandering in the desert shows a deep connection to faith and patience. Another part of Moses' greatness is how he dealt with challenges and failures. He was not perfect. He had moments of doubt, anger, and frustration. Sometimes he questioned himself and even God. This makes him relatable because he was human with flaws, but kept moving forward. Moses' reluctance and self-doubt form a central theme in his story and offer a deeply human perspective on leadership. From the moment God calls him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses does not immediately embrace the task. Instead, he expresses hesitation and uncertainty. This reluctance is not simply a minor detail, but a fundamental part of his character and the narrative, revealing the complexity behind the role of a prophet and leader. When God appears to Moses in the burning bush and commands him to confront Pharaoh, Moses responds with several objections. He questions his own ability to carry out the mission, saying that he is not a good speaker and is slow of speech. These words show that Moses doubts his own capacity to communicate effectively and to persuade others. His insecurity contrasts sharply with the traditional image of a prophet as a confident and charismatic figure. Moses worries that his speech limitations will prevent him from fulfilling God's command and that the people will not believe him. This self-doubt highlights his humanity and vulnerability. Moreover, Moses' reluctance can be seen as a reflection of the overwhelming nature of the task before him. Leading an entire nation out of slavery requires not only courage, but also extraordinary strength and wisdom. Moses is aware of the enormity of the challenge and his own shortcomings. His hesitation stems from a realistic assessment of the risks and difficulties involved. This realistic self-assessment makes his story relatable, because it shows that great leaders often begin their journeys feeling unsure of themselves. The contrast between Moses' self-doubt and the confident prophet ideal is striking. Prophets are often imagined as bold visionaries who speak with unwavering certainty and inspire others through their authority. Moses, however, frequently pleads with God for reassurance and assistance. He questions whether the people will listen to him, and even asks God to send someone else. This humility and dependence on divine support challenge the stereotype of the fearless leader. Instead, Moses exemplifies a leader who grows into his role through faith and perseverance. His reluctance and self-doubt offer a powerful insight into the nature of leadership and prophecy. His initial hesitation and doubts about his own abilities make him a more relatable and realistic figure. By struggling with his fears and limitations, Moses shows that leadership is not about perfection, but about trust, courage, and gradual growth. Moses remained a steady leader, always trying to guide his people toward a better future. That kind of resilience is inspiring because it reminds us that greatness is not about never failing, but about never giving up. His story has inspired countless people facing oppression or hardship to believe that they too can overcome their struggles. Let's make a bit of a detour and discover how Moses is revered in different religious groups. First up, there's Judaism. Moses is basically the superstar prophet in Judaism. He is the guy who led the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, which is like the ultimate story of liberation. He's also the one who got the Ten Commandments straight from God on Mount Sinai. So he's seen as the lawgiver and the one who founded the covenant between God and the Jewish people. Jews see Moses as the greatest prophet ever, someone who talked to God face to face and was the ultimate leader who shaped their identity. The whole Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, is traditionally believed to have been written by Moses, so he's literally the foundation of Jewish religious law and history. Then you have Christianity, where Moses also plays a huge role, but with a slightly different twist. Christians respect Moses as a prophet and a leader, but they see him as someone who pointed to Jesus Christ. In a way, Moses represents the law and the Old Covenant, whereas Jesus represents the New Covenant and grace. So Christians often talk about Moses in sermons and teachings as the one who prepared the way for Jesus. Some stories about Moses are repeated in the Old Testament, and Christians think of him as part of their spiritual heritage, even though Jesus and the New Testament take center stage. In Islam, Moses is known as Musa, and he is one of the most frequently mentioned prophets in the Quran. He is considered a messenger of God sent to guide the Israelites and lead them out of Egypt. The Quran recounts many of the same stories like the burning bush, the plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, but sometimes with additional details or slightly different emphasis. Muslims admire Musa for his steadfast faith and patience, even when his people doubted him. He's seen as a role model for perseverance and obedience to God, and one of the 5 greatest prophets, along with Noah, Abraham, Jesus, and Muhammad. So he's huge in Islamic tradition as well. If you look at the Rastafari movement, Moses is kind of a symbol of freedom and resistance against oppression. The story of the Israelites escaping slavery resonates a lot with the history of African diaspora and colonialism. So Moses is like the archetype of liberation. He's invoked in songs and teachings to inspire breaking free from oppression and living righteously. Some Rastafarians see Ethiopia as the new promised land, much like the Israelites' journey, and Moses is central to that vision. In the Baha'i faith, Moses is recognized as a manifestation of God, which means he brought divine teachings suited for his time. Moses is one in a line of messengers, including Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, and Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith. So they view Moses as a crucial figure who helped humanity progress spiritually. His laws and teachings were meant for the people back then, but Baha'is believe that divine revelation is progressive and continues with new messengers. There are also smaller groups and mystical traditions that have their own takes. Moses is very important in Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition where he is seen as a spiritual master who reached high levels of divine understanding and connection. Moses in Kabbalah symbolizes the human capacity to ascend spiritually and gain wisdom beyond ordinary experience. Some Christian sects, like the Seventh-day Adventists or Jehovah's Witnesses, emphasize Moses in their teachings about the law and prophecy. They might see him as a key figure in understanding God's plan for humanity and use his story to support their unique theological views. Even outside of strictly religious contexts, Moses pops up as a cultural icon, symbolizing justice, freedom, and leadership. He's referenced in literature, art, and political speeches across centuries, showing how his story resonates beyond the original religious settings. Moses is like this amazing, multifaceted figure who means a lot to all kinds of people in different ways. Some see him mainly as a prophet or lawgiver, some as a symbol of freedom or spiritual awakening, but no matter the tradition, he always represents something powerful and timeless. The guy who talked to God, led a people out of slavery, and changed history forever. The greatness of Moses is about much more than miracles or famous stories. It is about character, faith, courage, and the will to lead and inspire. Moses teaches us that true greatness comes from dedication to a cause greater than ourselves and the willingness to face difficulties head-on. His legacy continues to influence how people think about justice, leadership, and spirituality. Whether you believe in him as a prophet or see him as a powerful historical figure, there is no denying that Moses' life is a testament to what it means to be truly great. Here's where it goes ironic. If you step back and look at the story with a critical eye, Moses actually has a lot of weaknesses that make you question whether he fits the ideal mold of a prophet. First off, let's talk about his leadership style and personality because these play a huge role in how people view prophets. Moses was weak. Moses was often portrayed as reluctant and insecure. The story in the Bible where God calls him from the burning bush shows him trying to weasel out of the job because he doesn't think he's good enough or convincing enough. He even tells God that he's slow of speech and tongue, which suggests that Moses himself doubted his abilities. If a prophet is supposed to be a confident messenger of the divine, why would Moses spend so much time doubting himself? It makes you wonder if he was really this great spiritual leader or just an ordinary guy thrust into an impossible situation. This reluctance and self-doubt might indicate a lack of clear divine inspiration or certainty, which is something you'd expect from a true prophet. Another big weakness was Moses' temper. The stories show him losing his cool on multiple occasions. One famous example is when he smashed the tablets of the Ten Commandments after seeing the Israelites worshiping a golden calf. Instead of calm and measured guidance, Moses reacts violently. That kind of impulsiveness is a big red flag if you're supposed to be a divinely guided leader. Prophets are often seen as calm, patient, and wise figures who lead by example, but Moses sometimes comes across as hot-headed and judgmental. This raises the question, was he a divine messenger, or was he just a passionate man struggling to control his own people and his own emotions? Then there is the whole issue of Moses' close relationship with violence and war. A lot of the stories about Moses involve battles and strict punishments, including orders that led to the deaths of entire groups of people. The violence associated with his leadership contradicts the image of a peaceful spiritual guide. Prophets are generally expected to promote peace, understanding, and moral clarity. But Moses' legacy is tangled with acts that today would be considered harsh and extreme, like the destruction of the Amalekites or the harsh treatment of rebellious Israelites. This complicates his image as a holy figure because his leadership involved a lot of bloodshed and brutality. Moses also struggled with obedience himself, despite being portrayed as God's chosen messenger. There's the famous incident where Moses disobeyed God by striking the rock twice to bring forth water, instead of speaking to it as he was instructed. Because of this act of disobedience, he was denied entry into the Promised Land. If Moses was truly a prophet and servant of God, why would he disobey such a clear command? This moment shows a flaw in Moses' character. He was imperfect, and sometimes acted out of frustration or impatience rather than strict obedience. This imperfection is important because prophets are supposed to be ideal conduits for divine will, and any failure to comply with divine instructions calls that status into question. Did you know the story of Moses is full of contradictions and inconsistencies, which might suggest the narrative was shaped by multiple sources over time rather than being a straightforward account of a prophetic figure? The biblical texts have various versions and sometimes conflicting details about Moses' life, his family, and his deeds. This complexity makes it hard to pin down a clear and consistent image of Moses as a prophet. If a prophet is supposed to be someone whose message is clear, consistent, and trustworthy, then the ambiguity surrounding Moses' story is problematic. Moses shows a lot of human weaknesses: self-doubt, temper, involvement in violence, occasional disobedience, authoritarian leadership style, and a complicated narrative. All of these factors could make you question whether he really fits the definition of a prophet in the strictest sense. Prophets are often idealized figures who embody spiritual purity and moral clarity. Moses, by contrast, seems more like a flawed human being, who rose to a monumental challenge but struggled with his own limitations. That doesn't mean Moses wasn't important or didn't have a significant role in religious traditions, but from a critical perspective, it's fair to say that his weaknesses complicate the idea of him being a perfect or purely divine prophet. Instead, he might be better understood as a powerful leader shaped by his times, his people, and his own human nature, rather than a flawless prophet speaking unambiguously for God. The way Moses handled dissent among the people is another issue. The Israelites were constantly complaining, doubting, and rebelling, and Moses often responded with harsh punishments and extreme measures. Let's see if we have survived his generation, if we lived in it. The Mosaic Law. If you dive deeper into the biblical stories, you'll see something more complicated. Moses was not just a peaceful spiritual guide. He was also a military leader who gave violent and harsh commands. This side of Moses often gets overlooked or softened, but it's pretty important to understand because it raises big questions about morality, leadership, and what we expect from someone called a prophet. Let's start with the facts. Moses led the Israelites through a dangerous and hostile environment. They were wandering in the desert, fighting for survival against other tribes, and trying to form a new nation. During this time, Moses gave orders that led to brutal wars. For example, in the book of Numbers, he commands the Israelites to attack the Midianites and kill every man, woman, and child. That's a pretty harsh punishment by any standard. Another example is when the Israelites destroyed the Amalekites, again wiping out entire groups. These weren't just defensive battles either. Sometimes they were complete annihilations ordered as divine commands. So what does this say about Moses? On one hand, he's seen as God's chosen prophet, delivering laws that promote justice and mercy. On the other hand, he's a leader who endorses violence and extreme punishment. This is confusing because prophets in many religious traditions are expected to be peacemakers, to preach compassion and forgiveness. But Moses' story complicates that image. When we look at the moral side of these actions, it's tough. Were these orders justifiable? Were they necessary for the survival and identity of the Israelites? Or are they examples of cruelty and violence that we should criticize? In the ancient world, violence was a common tool for survival and power. Harsh punishments and wars were the norm, not the exception. Moses lived in a time when strength often meant survival, and the stakes were incredibly high for his people. Still, even with that context, the violent actions don't sit easily with the idea of a peaceful prophet. This contrast challenges us to think about how we interpret leadership and divine commands. It also makes us question how much context should affect our judgment of historical figures. Were these acts truly divinely inspired, or were they shaped by human political needs? Now, if we jump to today's world, the contrast becomes even clearer. Modern society generally condemns violence against innocent civilians and calls for peaceful resolutions to conflicts. Leaders are expected to protect human rights and promote diplomacy. When governments or military leaders order acts of violence, they often face criticism or legal consequences. Concepts like war crimes and crimes against humanity exist precisely because there's a global effort to prevent the kind of mass killings that Moses ordered. Think about leaders today who have to make tough decisions during war or conflict. They are under intense scrutiny and held to international laws and moral standards. The idea of wiping out entire populations is considered genocide and is universally condemned. This stands in sharp contrast to the biblical accounts where such actions were not only allowed but commanded by God. This difference highlights how moral frameworks evolve over time. What was accepted or even celebrated in Moses' time would be unthinkable now. But it also forces us to ask, How should we read ancient texts that include violence? Should we judge them by today's standards, or try to understand them in their own historical and cultural context? And if we accept that God commanded those actions, what does that say about the nature of divine justice? Beyond the grave. Some people might say that Moses is now wherever his teachings and legacy live on. Spiritually, Moses might be thought of as being alive in the hearts and minds of those who follow. Every time someone tells his story, they kind of bring Moses into the present moment. This means he exists not just as a historical figure, but as a cultural icon whose influence crosses centuries. Where is Moses now? Physically, he's long gone from this world, but in stories, teachings, art, and even in the hopes and dreams of people fighting for a better life, Moses is very much alive. He lives on in memory, faith, culture, and inspiration. Whether you see him as a historical figure, a spiritual guide, a cultural icon, or a symbol of freedom, Moses is still around in ways that keep his story relevant today. It's kind of cool to think about how someone who lived so long ago can still have such a big presence in the world now. Are you a Moses believer? Do you think it's possible to locate his tomb in the new era? We'd love to know what you think. Subscribe for more uploads like this.